Okay. Hey
Yeah.
everyone, this is your favorite friend Jay, and today I have an amazing guest, someone I'm really excited to talk to because Maggie Whitaker is a costume designer, performance creator, and artist. She recently designed the Sundance sensation Fairyland, directed by Andrew Durham and produced by Sofia Coppola. And Maggie, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing, Jay?
Well, I'm I'm a bit rocky, but I'm surviving and I'm just enjoying, I think, the arts and just communicating with people, talking to people and being myself, being out there into the world, which is, I think, the best thing in the universe for me. So yeah, and I'm just so happy to talk to you.
Fantastic. It's good to be able to have a quick chat on a beautiful day and on a lovely Friday.
Okay, awesome. So, Maggie, I heard you say that like all costume designers, I started in theater. How does
Yeah.
starting in theater help the costume designer or shape them?
Well, when you start in theater, you have to think about the whole body. You have to think about the whole story. When we are working on a stage, we can't control where an audience looks. We can't control what an audience experiences within the picture of the story. Everything's happening directly in front of them. Their eyes traveling, it's happening in real time. And that whole totality of the body, that whole totality of every single person existing in real time in constant motion in in a synchronized timed fashion uh consistently night after night. That training and that training for storytelling and also that training for pragmatism of your work must stand up night after night creates a certain framework for precision, and it also creates a certain framework for how you think about narrative, and you think about the body, and you think about the actor and what the actor needs and the kind of care that the actor needs to be able to tell their story and to be able to give their truth to the character. Does that, I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, a lot. Actually, a lot. So I want to know, I've talked to many costume designers. Some of them talk about texture, some talk about color, some talk about people and characters. What do you think is the thing that draws you or inspires you most when you're just creating or designing the costume for a certain project?
To me, it's always going into story. I became a costume designer not because I came from a place where I was sewing or making clothes. I came from a place where I was reading and desiring to be part of the story and wanting to be part of the world within the stage, within the narrative. And what I had to offer was this visual capacity. And it turned out that I could do this thing, and this was my way in. I was a terrible actor, but I was fortunate enough that in high school, every time I was trying to get into the space in the theater, they'd be like, well, we've got this little spot. You want to work backstage? You want to help out? And I'd be like, great. And then I was like, is there a way that I can just skip the traumatic audition process and just go straight backstage? That'd be awesome. I'd love that. Can I just go straight there? Because I just want to be here. I want to be a part of it. And so the story and being able to be part of the storytelling was really key. And for me, working directly with character has always been the most exciting. And so, however, I can get close to authorship, I think is what drives me, and that puts me in the room with the actors, it puts me in the room with the director, it puts me in the room with the playwright or the screenwriter, the basically the body of work, whatever the source material is on a given project.
Okay.
And where I'm happiest.
So you described yourself as someone who does not fret. Does this help, or does this make the custom design process even more toned down? Like I'd like to imagine, because I'm a kind of a fretter in a way, but I try to conquer it. And I love this about you. So just tell me, how does it
Um,
help you?
well, because it gets really stressful. There's a lot of moving parts, right? So if we look at Fairyland, for instance, we have something like 130-ish costumes between the three actors that hold the two main characters. And that's just a lot of moving parts. And then we have literally everybody else that's on that film. To be able to project manage that, which is what when you take away the art of storytelling, then you get into the practical project management aspect of that, of maintaining the integrity of the design, and then the just getting the objects to the right body and maintaining the continuity. If you get too stressed out about whether or not it's going to happen correctly, if you like take your panic and you bring that to people, that's going to cause harm. So if I, as a person, am not bringing a panic to people, I'm not adding a burden. And then when there are people that are going to have a panic, I can kind of release it. I'm also a parent, and so I spend a lot of time defusing small people who are kind of like, they get up here, and I need to bring them back down. I'm not perfect at it. And so like, if I'm not a completely calm person, but like I can at least mask like when my internal whir does get up here, I can mask it so that I can keep everybody else chill and help chill a situation back down so that we can get through it. And then at an appropriate time, I can, sort of swoon and take to my bed.
So you just mentioned Fairyland, and I heard you say that it honors the story of San Francisco. And I will ask you about the importance of authenticity in storytelling and how true people from true places should be the ones telling the story. So I
Yeah.
want to know, what do you think of that? And why did you say this particular beautiful sentence?
Well, for me, I hope that if I've lived in San Francisco in the Bay Area since 98 now, which not to try and date myself or feel old, but means that I've lived here for a really long time. I'm not a native, but I've lived here long enough that I feel like I can claim some ownership of this space, that I can hold this space pretty solidly. When I was granted permission to tell this story, it was really important to be able to deliver our community. The world of these intentional communities and this hippie world and these houses that Alicia and Steve first encountered in San Francisco, Paulette's house especially. These were homes that people I know today lived in. I know living Coquettes and descendants of Coquettes and survivors of the AIDS epidemic, that, these were their friends. There's still people in San Francisco that revive Coquettes musicals, and that's their part of their art. So this is part of our living history, and we pay tribute to it. So to be able to honor that and be able to showcase that, really, even in little vignettes within this story, because it's not, it's not a Coquettes movie, but it's part of the landscape of San Francisco, and it's part of the queer beauty of San Francisco, and it's what helps grow the sort of the genderqueer revolution that is part of 21st century queer culture today. We have a legacy as queers because of what was happening in the the queer and trans revolution in San Francisco, and of course in New York and elsewhere. But this is a San Francisco movie, so we're going to talk about our San Francisco queer revolution and the way that we were exploring gender and intentional community and all of it. And also, and then this story is also about family. And we can look at this sort of expansiveness, but we can also just say that there's a way that this is a story that is what it means to be a parent just trying to do right by your kid. And that's
Definitely.
just incredibly special and something that's just, I think, so universal. Like anybody who's ever struggled to braid a pigtail in when you're running late to school, or make a decent lunch so that your kid can get through their school day. Um, that's universal. You don't have to be a poetic gay dad to identify with Steve's struggle. Like that's every parent.
Definitely. And I feel that the most authentic stories are usually the most universal because they touch on something really, really internal and really special, but it's said with truth. So it just connects with someone from another part of the world, like myself, for example. So yeah, I totally agree with you. And this is why I want to ask you about the characters of Steve and Alicia. How did you approach designing for them or just imagining how they would be customized? Because I think costumes are our entry to the character. They shape our understanding of even things that are not said, are not shown to the viewer. How did you approach them?
We have a lot of original material. So Alicia Abbott, the writer and the author of the memoir, and also the actual Alicia, she shared with us a lot of her family photos. We were able to be in a relationship and in a dialogue with her as a production. She had a relationship with Andrew. She and Sophia Coppola had been in communication. So we had a lot of extant photos and a lot of detail because it had been a 10-year process before I had even been brought on. So there was a knowledge of what Steve should look like, who Alicia was, all of these photos, these key ideas of who they were. And so I had all of this extant material, which really helped. And then I can take that, and then I can take my research and knowledge of San Francisco, again, San Francisco culture, like knowing that Steve is coming from, he's Midwesterner, but he's coming from Atlanta and he's moving out to San Francisco, and then be able to sort of grow this story of somebody who's able to, this transplant. And again, like so many people, like you come from the South and you're moving to this place where you finally get to flower a little bit and then be able to tell that story for an audience of like how, Steve's aesthetic grows a little bit, like his first hippie house where he starts to flower up a little bit, like he explores and plays with hippie fashion a little bit more, and he sort of explores his like a little bit of flamboyance in the early 70s and that first household. And then when they moved, their first move in San Francisco, like he simplifies. And then there's another blossoming of fashion that's a transformation in the 80s. And we really sort of put a button for everybody. Again, this is like, I want to, create something that is recognizable, that our survivors and, that our memory, our cultural memory will be able to recognize the Castro Plum memory will have when he's with Charlie. People will be able to see that and be like, that's what that's the Castro Plum look. And we'll see that when he's playing with an identity with Charlie. And then when we are moving into his fourth act, that we see again almost sort of a return. And so we see him sort of like explore, play with look and then return back to a center that is him, and explore and play with the look, and then return back to a center that is him, because he has a poetic center that is always his. And one of the things that's true is that, it's broke. Like, he doesn't have a ton of money. And there's a way that his clothing is very contained, and his color palette stays pretty consistent. Like, there are pieces in his wardrobe from his sort of like act one that almost track all the way through act four. And what's really useful about that is there's pieces in his wardrobe that are going to track into Alicia's wardrobe later on in her life. And so if you're watching it, you'll see pieces that she adopts later on in her adult life that you will have seen on Steve earlier in his life. That are, a child adopting a parent's clothing, which is such a truism, because kids are always stealing their parents' clothes. Like, I know as a teenager, I stole my dad's like oversized clothes when I was a teenager in the 80s and 90s.
When I was a
Well,
kid in the
yeah,
90s, I took my dad's leather jacket and his tennis, like socks and stuff. And I think I got a little bullied at school for that. But I was, like the defiant, like, yeah, and I love what I look. And they're like, what are you? Like, why are you wearing this leather? Why are you wearing this weird, thick, like socks and shit like that? And I was like, yeah. So what I look like, I told them about a local singer. I was trying to emulate him, but I was actually trying to emulate my dad. So I totally kind of
yeah,
understand.
yeah. And it's also this where it's like this creating this connection. And it's this, we individuate from our parents and then we want to reconnect. And we create home. We separate and then we reconnect to home. And it's a way of telling that story visually. And in a weird way, it's like, it's kind of crazy to think that there were so many looks, and yet the goal, even though there were so many looks, is that we didn't feel like they had that much clothing. But you have to create this wealth of wardrobe to be able to telegraph this duration of time, because we're covering so many years of history for these two people, and then making it feel like you're just not seeing that much distinct fashion, but at the same time you just have to hit that many different looks just to cover the basis of time. And then with Alicia, because we see her as a child and we see her as a teenager moving into adulthood, we have a child in two phases. We have a child whose wardrobe is still, you still see the hand of her mother for the first half of child Alicia. And then you see, after, we want to see a feeling that she's grown past the clothes that still her mom's hand had touched. And that's really important, is that we see like that there's an era has passed in this child's life where she's now fully a San Franciscan child, and you're seeing not just San Francisco and Steve trying to dress her, but you're also seeing the influence of her grandmother trying to make sure that she has those things, and this loving grandmother from the Midwest. And so you have these sort of cross-pollination of clothing, of like really cute pieces of some gorgeous dead stock 70s like kids clothes. I mean, some really good dead stock 70s kids clothes. It's like extraordinary, like just some really good luck there. And also these like really ratty pieces, because dad just he doesn't know what to do, and he's broke and he's getting hand-me-downs, and it's like it's funky. It's kind of funky, like what dad's having to do to dress his kid. And it's a really beautiful mix. And then we move into a teenager, like hopping off the bus, and it's the early 80s, and we really want to capture that sense of that sort of like 80s new wave vintage, and like really nail it. So you feel like, and I wanted it to feel like the way that it looked, I don't know, I wanted it to be really badass, just correct. Like we hit all of our buttons. Like we were my ACD Anna per second was going through all of her, like she was uh rating her like college photo albums, um because she's like almost exactly 2 years older than I am, and she's pretty much the same age as Alicia, and was like a total new wave girl. Our Taylor Jean Fredrickson was a coat check girl at um one of the clubs that was one of the clubs that Alicia was, pretty much one of the clubs in San Francisco that was sort of like in the same sort of vein as the clubs that Alicia would have been sneaking into with a fake ID in the
Wow.
80s. So we were all kind of cross-referencing all of these with like extant references of like how we dressed, and then like how we wanted to dress, and like what our, like, for me it's sort of like my fantasy of like what my iconic image of like, oh, this is how I dreamed, like what I was trying to get away with. They're like, yeah, this is exactly, you were what you were trying to get away with. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm like a little younger than you guys. So you were my ideal. I'm
Awesome.
somebody else's ideal, but you were my ideal. And then we were turning Amelia Jones into that. And then we were just like hitting those buttons. So I feel like the minute she walks off the bus, she's, hitting all of those markers. And I feel like it's pretty authentic.
It
So
is.
it's that mix of like a little bit of like, you see the 80s, but really what you're seeing is a mixture of like 40s and 50s oversized blazers. You're seeing like you're seeing vintage pieces, but you're seeing the vintage pieces like new wave kids in the 80s were wearing. And her friends are a mixture of like punk and two-tone gorgeousness. I mean, it's just, they look like they're thrifting everything, and it's a ton of vintage and dead stock. And it's that privilege of the movie. Nobody's doing anything dangerous, and you don't have to worry about stunts. So everything is vintage.
Wow.
I mean, it's just like this huge blessing. Like you don't have to worry about duplicating stuff. I mean, one, we didn't have the money to duplicate stuff, so you can't worry about it. And then you really don't have to worry about duplicating stuff to the same extent, because they're just not doing stunts and there's no big tricks. So everything gets to be the real deal.
Hey, wow. The way you described it, I felt like I was inside the movie and it was just so beautiful and so visual. I even envisioned the bus and everything. So, wow, Maggie. What I want
Mm,
to know is you designed
mm.
Fairyland and you designed for Shakespeare in theater.
Yeah, yeah.
So, how different is this and that? Like Shakespeare for me, is there like a constraint or restriction, or is it like on the contrary, a vast imagination of a time and a period, and like the play? How would you approach something like that after describing visually, like what you did with Fairyland?
I think we tend to get caught up in how language can become a barrier. So that can be whether or not something is in verse versus prose. That can be whether or not something is alien to us, whether it's a translation, whether it's in its original tongue, whether something's in subtitles, and we have to take more patience with it. And that can force us to do one of two things as an audience or as a participant in this in telling a story. It can force us to listen more carefully and become more engaged, or it can be a distancing tool, and it can shut us down. And that is a choice that we make within our hearts, right? That's like our first choice, is whether or not we start to shut down and be like, oh, I'm afraid because this is different, or oh, this is different, I need to lean
Embrace.
in, embrace. So if I'm doing something that's like Shakespeare, it's in verse. And the first thing is that Shakespeare I have to remember that Shakespeare was writing for a pretty rowdy audience, and the world that that story was being written for, they were writing to an audience of contemporaries. They were performing in clothes that were contemporary to their audience. Even if it was like Antony and Cleopatra, they were doing it in contemporary dress. They were not dressing in period clothes, right?
Okay.
They were repeating themselves constantly because they were having to compete with the audience and the crap that was going on in the audience's ground floor. It was a really different theatrical experience. So if we start to think about like Shakespearean originalism and how theater was being performed in an Elizabethan stage, it was much wilder. It was more like somewhere between pro wrestling and a wrestling audience and a like a runway with people going like upper echelons going there to seeing to be seen, people fighting and like getting into like all kinds of situations on the ground floor. So your performer is having to compete against the audience for attention. So they have to repeat themselves, which is why you have so much freaking exposition, which is why I don't particularly have an issue with edits, cuts, and rethinks on Shakespeare because the plays themselves went through a lot of edits, cuts, and rethinks because they had to. Um, so, but it all comes down to the plays themselves were filled with complex characters that were going through really human situations. There's a reason why we keep performing them, and there's a reason why we keep being engaged by them. But if we're going to do classic texts and we're going to continue to explore classic texts versus do new work, there has to be a reason why that particular story resonates with the audience in that moment. There has to be a justification for telling that story to our audience in that moment. We have to be thinking about how that story responds to something, either that the director is asking a question or is the theater company is wrestling with an issue or the community is engaged in that story. Because for live theater to work, it has to be in some kind of conversation, not just with the theater, with the actors, with the director, with the company, but with the audience itself. It has to be in a relationship, otherwise, why are we doing it?
Exactly.
Exactly. So to do a Shakespeare production has to have relevance. To do a Moliere production has to have relevance. We have to be in conversation. We have to wrestle with the the things that are complicated. And I think we have to make amendments, and we have to think about where these stories are problematic, and uh, we have to challenge them head on. I mean, there's an entire subset of Shakespeare that are called problem plays for a reason. They're not comedies, they're not tragedies. They're problems. They do not end neatly. And I think that the fact that we have an entire subset, an entire genre of plays that are problem plays is a beautiful thing because that says that we're okay with messy endings. And I think that's such a cool thing that we have a class of classics that we sit with discomfort and we say that's okay. So
Definitely.
to me, that's something that's really special. And that so with that in mind, you take the question that we're asking, whether it's 12th Night or Measure for Measure or a modern text and you say, well, what is the question we're asking? Who is the audience? What is the space? And let's look at this. And who's our cast? You know, what's our concept? What's the construction of this story? And then we design it. And then we tell that story.
Oh, of
Yeah.
course. Awesome, awesome answer. All right, Maggie. So what I want to ask you is because you were just describing Fairyland, and now that I see it's going to live its legacy and it's going to be a mark left in history, telling this story and leaving it. Have you ever watched, because you're so immersed in the storytelling process, and this is what drew you to art in the first place, have you ever watched a movie or a play and you felt like, oh my God, this is something that I really this is driving me. This is making me feel I want to be part of the bigger picture of the storytelling process. Was there this aha moment for you from a film or a play?
There are times when I watch other people's work where I think to myself, this validates why I continue to do this work. Like I'll see like a Taylor Mac production. Like when I didn't get to see all of the like 24 hours of American music where they were doing like in 4 hour chunks going through the history of American music. And there was like a one version where Taylor was doing all 24 hours of the production in a 24-hour nonstop, and that seemed nuts. I don't know how they make it through that, but when I watch their work, I can feel this sense of validation on what we do in doing live performance. Or sometimes when I see a particular film, and I at the moment that I'm saying this out loud, to name a singular film and be like, bam, this is a film that makes me validates what we do. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is what I do film. Or this is why I do this. It's hard to pull like a specific project. But like I often when I'm feeling a little low and like tired, I'm like, why do I keep doing this? This is really hard. I'll see something and you see the power of good storytelling. And, oh yeah, okay, this is what it's doing. This is really important. Um, because I think we do need to be able to gift stories into the world that teach people how to dream and teach people how to visualize a world that can be either validating or transformative or just show people light, a better way of being, or just can be just really funny. It doesn't have to be a transformative educational experience. Joy is enough.
Definitely. So you were mentored by the great Aggie Rogers.
Yeah, I mean, Aggie has been a huge influence in my life. I've had a lot of really amazing mentors. Over the last few years, Aggie has done so much for me in the Bay Area, but I also want to mention Judy Dolan, who is my mentor in graduate school. She is a Tony Award winning costume designer and also the professor emerita at UC San Diego, where I got my master's degree. So between the two of them, I feel like I have been given a huge wealth of love and care and empowerment to do this work. And I would like to state that both of them are parents. And then my third mentor that I would like to give a shout out to is also Annie Smart, another amazing mentor and parent out there. Because I think that there's something really important about there's a generation of women who are doing this work who were not given role models of how to do this work and also be working moms and who did it anyways so that my generation could. And I think that if there's any chance to create more visibility for that, um, I'm gonna make sure that that visibility is there, because that was just so impactful for me. Um, Even before I entered grad school, was Judy sitting me down and being like, if anybody ever tells you you can't do this as a parent, you can tell them, I don't think she said you can tell them to go straight to hell, but that they're absolutely fucking wrong. You can do it. It's hard, but you can do it. So don't let anybody stop you. So,
Awesome. So
um,
for
just
me, I mean, like Beetlejuice and Witches of
oh,
Eastwick, because I love witches. I love Witches of Eastwick so much. I know.
also, like, don't forget American Graffiti, and also, I mean, Return of the Jedi is no slouch either.
Yes. Oh my
But
gosh.
like, Beetlejuice, my God, I have not stolen, not appropriated, but given homage to so many little details to that movie in so many strange little ways over my life, in musicals and in little places, whenever humanly possible, like the glove headband
Yes.
on Catherine O'Hara. I mean, I mean, Aggie is a genius. And she also works in found objects. She really believes in the sort of like imbued spirit of existing garments. She's a rag picker.
Wow.
Just, you know, does like she just really loves like living garments. Like there's something very special about finding things that have had a life before you bring them onto another body. So like going shopping with her is digging through like used rag mills and dumpster, not dumpster diving, but like going into like not just like a vintage store, but going into their warehouse where they have the stuff that they haven't put out yet.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's
That's wild.
it's
Awesome.
really good.
I
It's
know.
really good. Yeah.
So how is it like costume shopping with you? Like what would Maggie do? If I am going
Oh,
with you costume shopping, where would you naturally go?
I tend to I go to used clothing stores. Um, it depends on the show. I mean, where the story determines uh the experience. So when I'm shopping with my assistants, it really depends on the characters will determine where we go shopping. When we were doing Fairyland, it was Ryan, Thurston, and I were hitting a lot of vintage stores together. He was one of my other ACDs. He's brilliant. So I was like my main team of my two main ACDs were Annika Second and Ryan Thurston. And so Ryan has all of these insane hookups with all of these vintage dealers. He is one of the most charismatic individuals on this planet. And so he can talk his way into people's back rooms and into their like weird fabric dumpsters. He's amazing. Um, so we would go into like afterlife vintages, like Luke's bins. He'd get into Mercy vintage and borrow from their bins. We would go to Empress and we'd borrow from them. And we just do these like big dives. And then I'd go down my biggest haul, and this was me by myself just because I couldn't afford to take anybody with me, as I went down to LA by myself before we started in our prep. And I went down and I went and saw Liz Baca, who has her shop is down in LA in the garment district, and her Insta is Busy Lady Baca, and her shop's called The Goods. And It's like a dragon's hoard of the best vintage in the entire universe. And she just cut me a huge deal because she's the most generous spirit on the planet. And I can only imagine that shopping with her is even better than shopping with me. But like, I just took up just tons. I probably overshop because I do tend to feel like I would rather regret spending money and having to eat owning something and storing it than to think about the fact that I left it behind.
Awesome. This is the way Maggie is.
Yeah. Um, and like I tend to train like my assistants, I tend to train them how to like measure things on the fly. Like there's a lot of like pulling things out and measuring them and like organizing and sort of like sorting racks. Um, but there is the very sort of mercenary of like I do tend to avoid shops. I try to avoid the shops with like kind of effed up fast fashion sort of footprints.
Yeah.
So again, this is why I like to buy used whenever possible. If I'm doing something where we're buying a lot of very like wealthy looking clothes, like we'll tend to hit good buys. If it's local, then we'll hit good buys out in Pack Heights first. And we'll probably spend like if we're doing like a bunch of principals shopping for a feature and we're just trying to like build a lot of stock for like rich looking people. It's a luxury resale consignment, but it's like the rich neighborhood secondhand shop. And so you'll get like I found like um Armani dresses for like $100.
Seriously? Wow. Oh my
Yeah, yeah, and like you'll find stuff where the tags are still on it. Like I found this gorgeous Alexander McQueen blouse that was perfect for this TV pilot, where it was like this whole opening sequence was going to be the close up of this blouse and this woman, like this intimate, like it was just going to be like the torso, and like the blouse was going to be everything. And it was like the perfect blouse. And it was like a McQueen blouse with like this like subtle floral with like a little like neck strappiness going on. It was like $100.
And it's an original like Queen? Are you
Yeah.
serious? Oh my God.
And
People
you
are
can
so rich.
shop, you
They
shop
for
for
designer
like
clothes. I can't.
1,800 bucks, which is a ton of money, but you can
I
drop
know.
1,800 bucks and walk out of there with like 6 grand worth of stuff. And you've got all of your principles and kind of covered and a bunch of day players and you're set. Like you've got this huge stock of great pieces that are unique that you won't be able to like you can't do that kind of business at Bloomingdale's.
No.
Like it's not going to be as good. Like you're going to spend twice as much money. You could return it at Bloomingdale's, but you're going to spend twice as much money, and it's not going to be as good. Like you're going to like you like actress suits for like $80.
Whoa. Okay. Now you got me. I can't believe the insanity of
Right?
this.
It's insane. It's insane. So like that's so it really you just sort of and again that's an Aggie find. Like that Aggie took me there. And
Hey. Oh la la.
like if I can find if there's a used store that has a certain market that I will go there first. And even if you can't return it, if you can build the stock and then it then allows you to then port things that are going onto your leads onto day players, then it's worth it. Like you can then move the money
Take me
from
there. Yeah.
to the places where it needs to go, then you're not wasting the money. It's
Definitely.
it stays in the production. I mean, there's that moment where you're just like, of course they see me coming now. And they're like, oh hey. clear a rack. Like, I
I
also
know.
do the same, like the lady at the Berkeley Humane Society thrift store also does the same thing. She sees me walk in the door. She's like, "Oh my God, it's you." I'm like, "I know." She's like, "Be one of those days?" And I'm like, "Maybe." Because the Berkeley Humane Society thrift store down in Albany is bonkers good too. And it like I have done so much damage at that place for just being able to kind of like create racks of like for day players in background. And it's
Wow.
like quality, sort of like mid-range, neutral people.
So this is how you dress, like, okay, I know this doesn't apply to everything, but this is how you dress, like expensive looking people. Because sometimes you can tell, like I was watching this series on, like a channel, and they were pretending that this was a party for elites. And I felt like I want to see who this costume designer are, because it's just, I don't buy it. I don't buy it. It wasn't right. It wasn't like Gossip Girl. So let's say, for example, a Gossip Girl costume designer wouldn't be buying designer clothes, right? They wouldn't be always managing with, I think, designers, actual designers to design it. Would they be doing what you do? Like, would they be going to stores and buying stuff like that?
Well, I think for the designers for something like Gossip Girl, they actually do have the money to have relationships, and they're also able
Oh,
to go, and they're probably able to go to like they're able to take things out on spec from department stores and pull pull racks, or they're working with they have like in New York, you have just bigger and different resources.
hey.
I am doing a bigger budget show. If I was doing a really big budget show, I might also do something like go and use stylist services and like set up an account and use stylist services and stocks and then put together a rack. And then that way you do something like that so that you're not harming a salesperson by creating a purchase order and then they're working on commission. And then when you do a return, you're taking the money out of their pocket.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
And that's one of those things you have to be really mindful of is like the ethics of how you shop. Is using services that are put in place for costume designers and for studios, like because those are big studios that are doing those productions. So they have studio services that they're working with so that they're working outside of the commission systems and the direct sales. And they may also be working and having designer relationships. They're creating like client designer relationships with specific brands. Succession is working with specific brands and they are creating they're reinforcing client brand relationships like Laurel Canna and Zegna and all of those brands to sort of create and reinforce the identity of like whatever they're calling it now, stealth luxury or whatever it is. It's basically the same thing that was being done by Manbochet and back in the 30s, which was this understated luxury dressing that was part of extreme wealth in fashion during the Great Depression.
okay.
It's, understated luxury, extreme understated luxury dressing has been part of um, fashion, like high fashion dress for decades. It is not a new trend. I'm sorry, TikTok.
Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
There was a really interesting article in the Atlantic about it, and sort of like unpacking and sort of like deconstructing this trend that isn't a trend. But it was like thinking about it in
Awesome.
terms um, of how brands, and it's also we get into like if you're working with working with any kind of like designer, if you work with anything that has a logo, you have to get clearance. So you tend to avoid things with logos if you aren't working on a project that has a big enough budget to have a legal team to get clearance.
Yes. Oh, wow. Wow, the
Yeah.
process is just so massive. I never knew it. Thank you. This is awesome,
Yeah.
Maggie. You're telling me a lot about it. So, okay, what I want to ask you at the end is now that you've designed, now that you've done all these projects, which was a moment when you just looked at the character or the person, or let's say an ensemble, for example, you
Mhm.
felt deep down that, wow, this is why, oh, this is it. This is it.
There's been a couple of moments. I'm gonna say like there's a moment in Fairyland where I look at it and I'm like, yeah. There's two keys, two sort of like big group scenes. There's the 80s club scene where Alicia and her two besties go out, sneak out and go dancing. And it's like everything that I've ever wanted like when I was a kid and I wanted to like get a fake ID and go out clubbing. Like that was what I wanted it to be like when I would sneak out and go clubbing, except I never could get away with sneaking out and going clubbing like that because my parents were too strict.
Me
Um,
too.
and like the early 70s, like the birthday party, like little kid Alicia's, like the first party at the house, like that, like Freaky Coquettes party, like that is like I think we really nailed those big group scenes. Like they're really stunning. And then there's a movie that I have that is out that's streamable. It's got a really great title called Shit and Champagne. We're shooting this summer. Um, but it's available on Hulu. It's in the raunchy section. You have to
Okay.
put an asterisk where the I is. It's Darcy Drollinger, the official poet laureate of or not poet, sorry, drag laureate of San Francisco. They're not a poet. They're the drag laureate of San Francisco, newly announced as of yesterday.
Wow.
Um, our first feature film with Darcy was we had a there's a full-on dream ballet in Champagne with a stunt double, dance double change in the middle of the dream ballet, where we go from Darcy, who's like 6'5" in the dance dream ballet, to a tiny woman as the dancer. And Darcy's a drag queen. And then the dance double is comically tiny. She's like 5'1". So we go from 6'5" to 5'1", and then all the bodies, like the dance doubles for the two thugs that were assaulting Darcy, also shift and are much smaller than the two thugs that were previously. And then when it becomes a big disco dream ballet dance number, it's it's the best. So being able to do a legitimate dream ballet in the middle of it and have a dance fight in that movie was one of the greatest joys of my life. And then it also devolves into when we snap back, Darcy's dress being ripped off of her body,
Wow.
with being a practical dress rip as opposed to being like a cutaway. So we had to devise how the dress was going to like snap, rip in real time. And we had to get it right in 2 takes. We only had, you know, so that we had a backup, and it was a night shoot. So that was really special.
Wonderful. Thank you,
So
Maggie. You just created a sense of magic for me. I can visualize everything and dream with you. And I can't wait for you to even be a bigger part of the storytelling process all over the world.
thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I had a great time.
Thank you. I did too. This was really fun. Thank you so much for all of the time you took with me and the opportunity to share.
Thank you. I'm just so happy and wild with imagination and stories. Thank you so much. Bye.
Right.